Okay. Good morning, one and all. Thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate that. The topic today is Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act of 2014. Where are we now? Okay. In order to get started, the question is, what was happening before? Before that passage, there was a minority of plans that were facing insolvency. And some actually did become insolvent. So the PBGC estimated that they had somewhere around 1.5 million participants, both in the IBET plans, as well as construction industry, and as well as other other unions. There was no early intervention option. You just went broke or insolvent. Local 6, unfortunately, was a recipient of that. They went insolvent, and now the question is, once their assets were depleted, what happens next? Well, the benefits get reduced, $12,870 per year for somebody with 30 years. And when they say 30 years, they mean 30 years. There's no PBGC guarantees for multi-employer plans, really. Those plans are given loans, and the employers and the active participants get to pay them back. That's a kind of a problem. But even at that, there was a question as to could the PBGC potentially manage everybody that was going to be potentially running into trouble. And the answer is decided no. Even now, it might be a decided no. And the reason for this is PBGC is a governmental, quasi-governmental agency. There's no funding from Congress. There is congressional approval of premiums, but the premiums that they indicate are needed to keep people or keep their promise and have money available. Estimates run between $90 and $150. That doesn't sound like much in terms of $90 to $150 per participant until you start looking at who are participants. You got deferred vestige, you got pensioners, and you got actives. So if you take a ratio of 3 to 1 and you bulk it up, you find out that that's worth somewhere between 22 and 35 cents per hour, assuming 1,700 hours, per participant, or per active guy. So that means it comes right out of the paycheck, goes nowhere, it doesn't go into the plan, it goes right to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. So the question is, what can you do to square things up? You can apply for MPRA. Now, what do you have to do in order to be there? You have to be in a declining and critical status plan, which anticipates insolvency in 15 years or 20 years, depending on your circumstances. More importantly, trustees have to have taken all reasonable measures to avoid insolvency, and the fund must disclose to participants and other stakeholders exactly what the status is. So if I'm in critical and declining, the question is, can I voluntarily elect? Yes, you can. However, by suspending benefits. My mouth is starting to get dry here. But suspensions will, only if they will avoid insolvency. More importantly, what you cut them back to can leave you no more than a 5% margin. And you have to be 110% over the PBGC's multi-employer guarantee. Well, that's a pretty fine line to draw, and it's a kind of a problem for actuaries to do that. And you'll see why in a minute. Okay, there are protections that are associated with MPRA. For instance, anybody over 80 doesn't get cut back. People between 75 and 80 have graduated suspensions. And I don't think it affects many of our funds. So with 10,000 or more participants, you got to put on a retiree representative, and he gets a free hand with actuarial and legal expenses. The problem is he's not a trustee. So the trustees have to submit a plan on the suspensions, and they must generally distribute equitably among the classes of participants. I might add that the Local 17, I got a number of notes saying it wasn't very equitable because it ran between 40 and 60%, but I suspect that had something more to do with potential double pension credits in a year and or changes as far as retiree benefits were concerned. So, if you're going to use MPRA, timing becomes everything. You, in effect, you got a 90-day window from when you measure your asset value and your thing to go ahead and make that calculation and submit your application. So that means you better be thinking about this quickly. Because if you're not thinking about it quickly, you're going to keep on dissipating your assets, and eventually you may get to the point where you can't have a suspension that's deep enough to save you. You know, don't wait too long. If you're considering it, get on it, get thinking about it now. Other important thing is, hey, look, the effective date has to be 9 months from your application. Best of all, Treasury can take up to 225 days to make up their mind as to whether or not they're going to deny you an application or give it to you. So that says, from beginning to end, it's slightly more than 10 change months in order to figure out whether you're going to be able to do it or not. So every month, if you had a declining balance in your assets, to get a no, well, all of a sudden changes your picture rather dramatically. Okay, to date, we've noted, my last information was we had 11 requests for suspensions. 4 were denied, the biggest one being the Central States. I think Joe's going to mention something about that. And 4 were withdrawn, 2 were in review, and only 1, Ironworkers Local 17, who acted and did a good job, even despite some of the notes that I got, actually was approved. So, take it away. Question here is, all right, if MPRA isn't the answer for everybody, you know, what else is there outstanding? So the question is, what about other alternative plan designs? And Joe, you might say a word or two about that?
Yeah, before I get to that, I'd like to make a couple of comments about the Central States plan. There's been a lot written about that, and many of you, I assume, have read about what's going on with the Central States, but for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a very, very large plan, hundreds of thousands of members. It was hit very hard by deregulation of the trucking industry, and it's projected to run out of money within 8 to 10 years, and that's devastating for all the participants, including retirees. It could bankrupt the PBGC, which is supposed to be the safety net, which may not be there. But what I wanted to comment on was the whole process with the Treasury Department. As Jig said, the Treasury ultimately approves or denies the suspension. Let me also say that none of the trustees want to reduce benefits. It was absolutely clear that it was sort of a last resort. How do we save the plan? Not how do we hurt participants, but how do we save the plan? And the only way they were going to save the plan was by cutting benefits. So everyone was going to feel a little bit of pain, but pensions were going to continue. The Treasury, as Jig said, had 225 days to make up their mind to approve the suspension that the trustees put in place. What the plan relied on was temporary regulations that were promulgated toward the end of 2015. So they worked diligently for the next several months, preparing calculations, communicating with the participants, working with the Treasury almost daily, weekly, information going back and forth with the Treasury. Here's what happened. About a week before, about 215 days into that 225-day period, the Treasury put out their final regulations, which were different from the temporary regulations, and which ultimately meant that everything had to be undone. Well, there was no time. In 10 days, they couldn't possibly do that, and so they denied the suspension. It's really a sad situation because that plan, because of its size needs to be fixed. We need a solution. Otherwise, healthy plans, like many of you that fortunately are in healthy plans, are going to have to keep paying this higher and higher PBGC premium that Jiggs talked about. So we do ultimately need a solution for Central States. We thought we had one, and Treasury denied it, even though the solution that you could say that they concluded that the plan that the trustees put in place would have kept the plan going for decades, but not indefinitely. And there's something else called a Goldilocks rule, which is really interesting. Jiggs referred to it as a 5% margin. But the idea was you can't cut too much and you can't cut too little. It has to be just right. That's the Goldilocks rule. So that's a real challenge to get that just right. And unfortunately, the Treasury Department denied the suspension. So again, it's something that we have to solve because of the size of that plan. So let me jump to this next slide and talk a little.
Your indications were too that your pre-indications from Treasury with Central States was that you were on the right road and it had a good chance of being approved, correct?
They were working, as I said, weekly with the trustees and the consultants to Central States, asking all kinds of questions, being fed information, and never were they told that it was likely that they had to change the formula before the Treasury would approve it. So it's really unfortunate. You could read into what you want, but it was an unfortunate situation. As I said, let me jump to some designs that I think even President Dean perhaps referred to this morning. You all are familiar with a typical defined benefit plan. I think most of you are in a typical defined benefit plan where you're promised a benefit for life. That's the whole idea behind a defined benefit plan. The other extreme is a defined contribution plan, which have become very, very popular. Is a pot of money put aside for you, and hopefully that's enough for you to live on for the rest of your life in your retirement years. But the problem with the defined contribution plan, one is you don't know how long you're going to live. You could outlive that money. In a defined benefit plan, you don't outlive the money. The promise is there for your life, provided the funding is there. But what we've been trying to do in the multi-employer space is find alternative designs that might be a better solution than a typical defined benefit plan that you've all been living with for many years. And I can tell you that if you want to track down Steve Sweeney, he's already working on this variable design concept. There's a couple here on this slide. One is called variable accrual design. And what happens in that plan is each year, the amount you accrue changes depending on the investment results of the plan. Typically, you look back maybe at a 3-year average. There's all kinds of ways to design that kind of a program, but you'll be told at the beginning of the year what you're going to be accruing for the next year. So the idea behind that is it helps control the cost of the plan. The other variable design annuity is a little tougher to swallow because in that kind of program, what you've accrued can actually be reduced if investments are very weak. Now, these designs do not fix the legacy liabilities. They only help the future liabilities and get these plans going on perhaps a more solid basis. Another one is it's been around for a while. It's a cash balance plan. What that is, it looks like a defined contribution plan. You're told each year how much money is being put aside for you, but it's not really your account because at retirement, that money is converted into a lifetime pension. So that's typically the way a cash balance plan works. And the last one on this chart that I'm going to ask Ron to talk about a little is called 414K, which he's been working on quite a bit. And that's where you can actually take money that's in a defined contribution plan, a 401K plan, and put it into a defined benefit plan to buy yourself a lifetime benefit. So we've been trying to get approval to be able to do that on an annual or a biannual basis to convert those dollars into a lifetime benefit. And Ron's been working very closely on that, so I'll turn it over to you, Ron.
Joe and Jiggs and I went to PBGC and to the Internal Revenue Service about 3 years ago with the concept of converting our National Shopman Pension Fund to a 414K plan. What is 414K? That refers to Section 414K of the Internal Revenue Code, 26 U.S.C. 414K. And what it specifically states in about 2 sentences is that you can have a defined contribution portion of a defined benefit plan. I call it a subtrust. So that within the Shopman Pension Fund, we could have a defined contribution subtrust, and it will be treated by the IRS with respect to contributing employers as a defined contribution plan, not a defined benefit plan. What's the importance of that? Well, the importance is employers who contribute only to the DC subtrust would accrue no withdrawal liability, 0. The disadvantage is that participants would get a somewhat lower benefit accrual each year. Why? Because basically what you are doing is shoving or shifting the potential liability from the employer side of the house to where the employees or participants absorb that liability. So you may only get 80% of the benefit of a participant whose employer contributes directly to the defined benefit portion. That extra 20% is to basically hedge against any potential liability in case of decreased investment returns or reduced contributions. The code is very simple. That's all it says, is that you can do it, and with respect to contributing employers who only give to the DC subtrust, they are treated as contributing only to a defined contribution plan. Therefore, they accrue no withdrawal liability. The IRS acknowledges that that is true, and they suggested, well, you have to restate your plan anyway next year. This was 3 years ago. Why don't you put that as part of the restatement? Just restate the plan, creating a DC subtrust. That is exactly what we did, and then the delays started. We got a series of about 15 questions from the Internal Revenue Service, totally unrelated to our concept. We made very clear in a cover letter with the proposed plan change what we were doing, and we still couldn't get any answers. Finally, we got an answer last fall saying we think this is going to be approved. It was right before the election, but it's been sent to quality review, whatever that is, some bureaucratic department or division within the IRS, and we expect an answer quickly. I have since called them about once a month. We've gotten some folks in Congress who are supportive of us and of employers involved. We're just waiting for the answer. And the idea would be, if this thing gets approved, and we've got an indication it will be, although in view of what happened with Central States, don't bet on that. The idea would be that we could attract new contractors, that every year or maybe 2 years, the defined contributions that are made on behalf of a participant would be rolled over as a DB benefit unless the participant specifically indicated otherwise. And so we'd have steady cash flow, which for the NSPF fund, which is a very well-funded plan now, but is underwater in terms of having fewer actives than retirees. It's got probably 3 or 4 times as many retirees and deferred vesteds as actives. The idea would be that we could attract new people into this thing, new contribution base, and it would continue the healthy condition in which that plan currently is. It's a green plan, but if we don't fix some of these things, it may not be green for long.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, hybrid.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to cover one more thing. I'm sorry, we are on the right slide, composite design. You may not be aware of a group called the NCCMP. It stands for the National Coordinating Committee on Multi-Employer Plans. President Dean is an officer and director of that organization. And what their mission is to really make sure that your plans survive, your plans are safe. They've done great work in putting together and coming up with legislative change to help your plans and your participants. One of the major changes of MPRA was what we just talked about, suspension of benefits. Unfortunately, it means some people are going to have to get reduced benefits in order to save their plans. But there was another major part of their proposal. The document was called Solutions, Not Bailouts. It was called that because we were looking for solutions for troubled plans, and there was no money coming from the government. There was no bailout money coming from the government. So what didn't get approved was this composite design, and let me quickly tell you what that is. It's a new concept where you fund the plan at a much higher level so that you can keep that promise. So that promise of the pension will be there. But there will be no withdrawal liability for employers. There'll be no PBGC guarantees or premiums. And the trustees have the right to reduce benefits if the investments go south. So it's, again, it relates to the future. It doesn't fix the legacy liabilities, although it gives plans an opportunity to extend the amount of time they have to fix their liabilities. There's still proposed legislation to try to get this in. It was disappointing that it wasn't passed a few years ago, but the NCCMP is still pushing to try to get it passed.
I'd like to thank them for their performance, and we're a little ahead of schedule. And so what I suggest is if anyone has questions about any of the remarks or comments in general, we have microphones available for anyone.
Zippo.
Everyone's a pension expert. Let me tell you, on the NCCMP, we were very close. We believe we would have passed that legislation last year, but the government went to a continuing resolution which does not allow any passage of laws. You can't tack a bill like this onto that. So we feel like we did the legwork, and we've got a lot of the vetting done, but there's no easy answers. But with the NCCMP, it's a stakeholders group of large employers, contractors, and labor folks. And they explained that the Teamsters are a target or a potential draw. The mine workers are a potential draw. And the reason that is they've had government regulation that those two sectors of the unionized industry could take away all the insurance that we have available. And that would leave all of our construction type employers, from the largest that are sitting in the room down to the small little 10 and 12 man mom and pop shops that make up the majority of our signatory contractors, hanging in a plan. So what we're trying to do is have viability. What Council Gladney spoke about with the 414K is our National Shopman's Pension Fund is the one plan that I sit on that Mr. Wise embarked them to pursue from the IRS and PBGC for approval. And our thought process would be is the distressed plans that are out there, we could fix prospectively and have a safe haven for everyone to have retirement security for our members. But that still doesn't have that magic wand that fixes the distressed plans previously. And I can point to the distressed areas, and you take an example like Alaska. They had a pipeline. They now have less workers and they have more retirees than actives because when the pipeline went away, a big source of employment is gone. In Buffalo, the steel mill shut down. It left the rest of the construction market, but it lost the economic engine. In Baltimore, it had a Sparrows Point steel mill that coupled with commercial construction. Every one of those is missing a viable component, and it's put stress on the pension plan. So now I want to just tell you, if you're in a well-funded pension plan, you thank your trustees for doing the job, not only now, but previous to this date. If you're on a slippery slope, be honest with yourself and hold your leaders accountable and find out a way to get that. Anyone not want retirement security when you retire? Yeah, I didn't think so. Everyone wants a pension, but we got to fix sometimes our predecessors' unintended consequence. Maybe they didn't see the steel mill industry leaving a market, or the car industry right-sizing in Detroit and having an economic impact on our pensions. But it's having planned professionals and folks. And I just want to take one liberty here, and I'm going to thank all of them for their remarks, but I don't know how many of you know, but Mr. Higgs is our administrator, and he's announced that he's reached that golden age and he wants to enjoy his retirement right here in sunny San Diego. And come June, that'll be Jiggs's last month of employment. He served this international well, so I'd like you to give him a hand.
Thank you.